crash landing on an icy hell. The cold was the first thing Ethan Hayes felt. A deep, biting cold that wrapped around him like 1,000 frozen knives, stabbing through his thick survival suit. His breath came in ragged gasps, turning into mist that immediately froze in the air. He groaned and forced his eyes open. Darkness, but not complete. The shattered glass of his helmet visor allowed some light to seep through, enough to reveal the endless white around him. Snow, ice, jagged cliffs reaching toward the sky like frozen daggers. His ship, the Starfire, was gone. No, not gone. Destroyed. Pieces of metal lay scattered around him, half buried in the snow. Flames flickered weakly from what was left of the engine core, but they would die soon in this unbearable cold. Ethan tried to move, but pain shot through his side. He gritted his teeth and looked down. His left leg was pinned under a piece of the wreckage. Blood trickled from a deep gash on his thigh, staining the ice beneath him. He closed his eyes, breathing heavily. Think, Hayes. Think. His team. His crew. Are they alive? He reached for his comms, tapping the cracked device on his wrist. Static. No signal. He switched frequencies. More static. The storm above was blocking transmissions. A sharp gust of wind howled through the frozen wasteland, lifting clouds of ice and snow into the air. Ethan shivered violently. His suit was damaged. It wasn't keeping him warm enough. His body was already slowing down. I don't have much time. With a deep breath, he reached down and grabbed the metal trapping his leg. His fingers were stiff, his gloves already coated in frost. He pushed with all his strength, grunting through the pain. The wreckage barely moved. He clenched his jaw. One more try. Summoning every ounce of strength left, Ethan shoved with everything he had. The metal groaned, then shifted. His leg came free, and he rolled onto his back, panting. But there was no time to rest. He sat up, biting back the pain, and checked his surroundings. Snow stretched in every direction, an endless wasteland of ice and death. No shelter, no warmth. Then, in the distance, movement. Ethan's heart pounded. At first, he thought it was his imagination. But no, the figures were real. Dark shapes moving through the snowstorm, coming closer. He reached for his sidearm. A weak pistol. Half a clip left. It wouldn't do much against whatever lived on this planet. The figures emerged from the storm. Not human. Tall. Armored. Their skin a deep shade of blue, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. They carried weapons, curved blades strapped to their backs, energy rifles in their hands. 4 warriors. Ethan had seen them in reports. A brutal, warlike species that had clashed with humanity before. He had hoped never to meet one in person. Now it looked like he was going to die at their hands. One of them pointed at him, speaking in a low, growling language. Another stepped forward, raising his rifle. Ethan tightened his grip on his gun. If I'm going to die, I'll go down fighting. The warrior took aim. Ethan's muscles tensed. Then, a blur of motion. A shadow moved behind the warriors. Fast, silent. Before the first one could fire, a blade slashed through the air, cutting across his throat. He gurgled, falling to his knees. The others turned, roaring in anger, but the shadow was faster. A second warrior fell, a dagger buried in his chest. The remaining 4 barely had time to react before the attacker struck again. A flash of steel, a sharp cry, and then silence. Ethan blinked, his breath freezing in his throat. The shadow stepped forward, into the dim light of the wreckage. A woman, not human. She was tall, her deep blue skin marked with white tribal patterns. Her dark hair was tied back, revealing sharp, angular features. A warrior's face, her glowing silver eyes locked onto Ethan's. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she tilted her head slightly and said, in a low, measured voice, "You are not supposed to be here, human, but I will not let you die." Ethan barely had time to process her words before darkness closed in, dragging him into unconsciousness. The alien warrior and the dying human. Pain. Cold. Silence. Ethan Hayes floated between wakefulness and unconsciousness, his mind struggling to claw its way back to reality. He was no longer lying on the ice, but his body still ached as if frozen to the core. His eyelids felt heavy, but he forced them open. A dim, flickering glow illuminated the space around him. It was small, enclosed, and warm. His fingers twitched, brushing against something soft. Animal pelts. I'm not dead. He shifted slightly, a sharp pain shooting through his side. A groan escaped his lips. Good. You wake. The voice was low and sharp, filled with an unfamiliar cadence. Ethan tensed and turned his head. She sat across from him, watching. The alien woman from before, the one who had saved him, was crouched near a small fire, her silver eyes glowing in the dimness. Her deep blue skin was covered in fine white markings, like veins of frost running beneath the surface. She wore layered armor made from thick leather and woven furs, shaped for both protection and mobility. A curved dagger rested on her lap, her fingers idly tracing the hilt. Ethan swallowed hard. His mouth was dry, his throat raw. Where? His voice cracked. Where am I? She tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression he couldn't read. A shelter. A dead beast's bones and skin keep the cold away. You were dying. I stopped that. Ethan blinked, his foggy mind trying to process her words. He glanced around and realized that they were inside the ribcage of a massive creature, its skeletal remains forming the structure of their temporary refuge. Large furs were draped over the bones, blocking out the howling wind. The fire in the center cast flickering shadows on the walls, giving the place an eerie glow. He looked down at himself. His leg was wrapped in thick white bandages, a faint warmth seeping from beneath them. You treated me, he asked. The alien woman didn't answer immediately. She just stared at him for a long moment, as if debating something within herself. I did, she finally admitted. I should not have. Ethan frowned. Why? Her gaze darkened. Because my kind. Do not say yours. Silence stretched between them. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. She had killed those other 4 warriors. Was she an enemy to her own people? A rogue? A rebel? Ethan licked his cracked lips and forced himself to sit up. The movement made his ribs protest, but he pushed through the pain. He had questions. Who are you? He asked. The woman hesitated, then said, Kalara. Her name was unfamiliar, alien. But somehow it suited her. Ethan, he said. Ethan Hayes. Kalara didn't react to his name. Instead, she picked up a small bowl and walked over to him, kneeling by his side. She held the bowl out. Drink. Ethan took it cautiously. The liquid inside was thick and dark, steam curling from its surface. It smelled earthy, bitter. He hesitated. Kalara exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. It will not kill you. Your body needs heat. Drink. Ethan took a small sip. The warmth spread through him instantly, filling his chest like fire. He coughed at the sharp taste, but it wasn't unpleasant. It reminded him of spiced broth. You are far from your home, human, Kalara said, watching him closely. Your ship is broken. Your people are gone. Ethan stiffened. His crew, his team. Were they really all dead? I need to contact my command, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. There must be survivors. Kalara shook her head. The storm is strong. No signals leave this place. Your people will not come. Ethan gritted his teeth. He didn't want to believe it. There had to be others. There had to be a way off this frozen world. I can't just sit here, he muttered. Kalara's eyes narrowed. Then you will die. Her bluntness hit him like a slap. He clenched his jaw, frustration boiling in his chest. You saved me, he said. Why? Kalara didn't answer right away. Her silver eyes flickered with something unreadable. I do not know, she admitted. But now I must decide what to do with you. Ethan's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Kalara stood up, her expression unreadable. If the Fori find you, they will kill you. And if they learn I helped you, they will kill me too. Ethan felt a cold dread settle over him. She had risked everything by saving him. But now, she was realizing the weight of that decision. Kalara turned toward the entrance, brushing aside a fur curtain. Snow whipped past outside, the wind howling like a hungry beast. The patrols will come looking, she said. They know a human is here. They will not stop until they find you. Ethan clenched his fists. He wasn't ready to die. You don't have to help me, he said carefully. If you let me go, they won't blame you. Kalara turned back to him, her expression unreadable. And then what? You wander into the storm and die alone. Ethan swallowed hard. He had no weapons, no shelter, no way to survive out there. She was right. He wouldn't last a day. Kalara stepped closer, her voice low and serious. I do not trust you, human. But I cannot leave you to die. So you will do as I say. You will obey, or I will leave you for the cold to take. Ethan stared into her silver eyes, realizing that his life now depended on this warrior, a stranger, an enemy, an alien. He had no choice but to trust her. Outside, in the endless frozen wasteland, dark figures moved through the storm. The Fori patrols were closing in. Time was running out. Escaping the hunters, the cold pressed in from all sides, like a silent predator waiting to strike. Ethan's muscles ached from the constant tension of knowing that death was closing in, whether by the freezing cold or the alien hunters hunting him. His head was still foggy, but the pain in his side had subsided enough for him to sit up and start to focus on his surroundings. Kalara's strange firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across the rough walls of their makeshift shelter. Ethan's eyes followed Kalara as she moved, preparing something by the fire. She was methodical, a warrior in every sense of the word, and it was evident in the way she moved. She didn't speak much, but her every action told him that she was calculating, planning. For a moment, he almost wished she had spoken more, given him some idea of what was coming next, but he could only wait for her lead. How long will the storm last? He asked, breaking the silence. Kalara glanced up at him from her work, her silver eyes reflecting the flames. Long enough, she replied cryptically. She didn't elaborate, and Ethan could tell she wasn't ready to explain everything just yet. His mind was still racing, trying to process the weight of what had happened since his crash. The cold world, the Fori warriors, Kalara's unexpected act of mercy. It was all too much to grasp. He didn't trust easily, especially not after everything he'd seen in his years of military service. But this was different. Kalara had saved him. She was his only hope of surviving here. And in some strange way, he knew that she wouldn't betray him. Not yet. The warmth of the fire seemed to ease his body, but it did little to calm the growing dread inside him. The Fori were out there, searching for him. The feeling of eyes on his back, metaphorically speaking, was overwhelming. Why are you helping me? Ethan asked again, more forcefully this time. You said your people would kill you for aiding me. Why risk it? Kalara stopped what she was doing for a moment, as though considering her words carefully. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. Because you are not the enemy, she said, her tone flat. At least, not to me. Ethan frowned, trying to understand the complexity in her statement. Was she questioning her loyalty to her own people? She was a warrior, someone who had clearly been raised to follow the rules of her kind. But she was breaking those rules for him. Then why do they want me dead? He pressed. Why are they hunting us? Her eyes darkened, a flash of anger crossing her features. The Fori do not trust humans. You are seen as weak, a threat to our ways. They believe you will destroy us, just as you have destroyed your own world." Ethan felt a pang of guilt at her words. The human race wasn't perfect. Far from it. But he knew their desire to survive wasn't born from malice. Still, the warlike mindset of the Foray made sense in its own twisted way. To them, he was an invader, an alien. He was a target. And he knew now that Kelura was risking everything to save him from the same fate. A sudden gust of wind howled outside, rattling the structure they were in. The sound made Ethan tense, but Kelura didn't flinch. She had been through this before. She stood up, brushing the snow from her fur-lined armor, and turned to face him with an expression that brooked no argument. "We need to move," she said simply. Ethan looked at her, alarmed. "What? Now? In this storm?" She nodded once. "The Foray are close. They will come here first." His heart skipped a beat. "But we're not ready," he argued. "We need supplies. We can't just walk into the storm." Kelura's eyes narrowed. "We do not have a choice. We move now, or we die here." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but something in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't giving him an option, and he knew it. They had no time. They needed to get out before the Foray found them. She handed him a set of heavy, fur-lined gloves and a thick cloak to protect him from the wind. The suit he had been wearing was no longer enough. It had been damaged beyond repair. With Kelura's help, he pulled on the cloak, which was surprisingly warm. He looked up at her, realizing that she had been preparing for this escape long before he had even opened his eyes. She was ready. He wasn't. "Where are we going?" he asked, as he tried to adjust to the new weight of the cloak. "To the hills," she said, pointing out into the storm. "There is an old outpost. We will use it to hide, regroup, and find a way to leave this world." Ethan's heart sank. He hadn't realized how close they were to their enemies. The Foray were already searching for him, and Kelura knew exactly where they could go to hide. An outpost that was now their only chance for survival. Kelura turned to the entrance and pulled aside the fur curtain, stepping out into the storm. Snow stung Ethan's face as the wind whipped around them, but Kelura moved with ease, as if she were born in this chaos. Ethan followed her, his breath coming out in visible clouds, his boots sinking into the snow with each step. They had to move quickly. The Foray were closing in. The snowstorm was fierce, and visibility was next to nothing. Ethan could barely make out the shadow of Kelura ahead of him as she cut through the storm with purpose. The cold burned his lungs, but he had no choice but to keep moving. He was alive because of her, and if he wanted to stay that way, he had to trust her. As they traveled, the world around them seemed to disappear beneath the endless sheet of white. The wind screamed in their ears, and the cold threatened to freeze them both. But Kelura led him through the storm with determination, and Ethan followed, knowing that the greatest danger lay behind them, not in the snow, but in the alien hunters stalking their every move. The Foray would find them soon, and when they did, there would be no mercy. The ice behemoth and the fight for survival. The world around Ethan had become a blur of endless snow and biting wind. The storm seemed to swallow them whole, the once familiar landscape now a shifting, disorienting void. Every step they took was like wading through a sea of white, the cold pressing in from all sides, while the wind howled as if it were alive, mocking their struggle. Ethan struggled to keep up, his legs aching under the weight of his heavy cloak, but he had no choice. Kelura was his guide, and he trusted her, even if he couldn't see where they were headed. How much farther? He gasped, his breath freezing before it could escape his lips. Kelura didn't answer immediately. She only glanced back at him, her face as stoic as ever, the fire of her silver eyes barely visible through the storm. Her body moved with a practiced fluidity, despite the harsh conditions. She seemed at home here, in this frozen hell. "Not far," she finally said, her voice cutting through the wind. "But we must hurry." Ethan nodded, though he didn't know where they were going. The landscape offered no clues, just endless white dunes of snow. There were no landmarks, no visible signs of civilization. In fact, Ethan had begun to wonder whether the Foray had already hunted down everything they needed to destroy. As they pressed on, a strange sense of unease began to settle over Ethan. His instincts told him they weren't alone. His pulse quickened as he scanned the storm around them, looking for any sign of movement. The air felt thick with something dangerous. And then he heard it, a low guttural roar. Ethan froze. His heart skipped a beat. Kaelara's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she instinctively reached for the weapon at her side. Her fingers brushed against the hilt of her blade, but she did not unsheath it. She merely tilted her head to listen, her ears twitching slightly. The sound came again, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated the air around them. It was close, far too close. Ethan's stomach twisted with a gnawing dread. "What is that?" he whispered. Kaelara didn't reply, her attention focused ahead. She moved silently, blending into the storm as she crouched low, signaling for Ethan to do the same. The wind carried the beast's scent to him, a pungent, sharp smell that made his stomach churn. He could almost taste it in the air, an overpowering musk of predator. Ethan crouched beside her, trying to steady his breathing. His heart pounded in his chest as he peered through the thick veil of snow, his eyes scanning the horizon. Then, a massive shadow emerged from the white wall of the storm, a shape larger than anything he had ever seen, moving with terrifying speed despite its massive bulk. The creature was unlike anything he had imagined. It was a behemoth, muscles rippling beneath thick, icy fur. Its head was shaped like a giant bear's, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural green hue, and massive tusks protruded from its mouth. It lumbered toward them, each step shaking the ground, its claws tearing through the snow as if it were a mere inconvenience. Ethan's pulse raced. He had never faced a creature like this, not in his training, not in any of the countless survival exercises he had completed. This was no ordinary predator. This was a monster, a true force of nature. Kaelara's voice cut through his growing panic, low and firm. "Stay still." Ethan nodded, though his hands trembled. He had never been good at staying still when faced with danger, but Kaelara was right. They had to wait until the right moment to act. The creature was too big, too powerful. If they tried to fight it head-on, they'd never survive. The behemoth paused, its head swiveling as it sniffed the air, seemingly aware of their presence. Ethan's stomach clenched, his instincts screaming at him to run, to do anything to escape the monster's gaze. But Kaelara remained motionless beside him, her body a perfect shadow in the snow. She wasn't moving. The beast began to move again, its massive form plowing through the snow, drawing closer and closer. The air seemed to thicken with its presence, the wind swirling around it like an unholy vortex. Then, just as Ethan thought they were doomed, Kaelara made her move. Without warning, she shot forward, faster than Ethan could follow. Her blade flashed in the dim light, slashing through the air with a deadly grace. She darted toward the beast, her movements fluid, as if she had fought creatures like this her entire life. Ethan's heart raced as he watched her. She wasn't afraid. She was in control, each strike precise, cutting into the creature's thick hide. But even as Kaelara fought, the beast retaliated with terrifying strength, swiping at her with its massive claws. One swipe sent Kaelara flying through the air, slamming into the snow with a sickening thud. "Kaelara!" Ethan shouted, his body moving before he could think. Instinct drove him. He grabbed the nearest weapon, a broken piece of the wreckage from the ship. It was jagged, crude, but it was all he had. He charged at the beast, desperation pushing him forward. The creature growled and turned, its massive tusks gleaming with cold malice as it bared them at Ethan. The monster roared again, lunging at him with a speed that took Ethan by surprise. The creature's tusks were deadly sharp, and it aimed directly at his chest. Ethan barely dodged, feeling the wind of the creature's attack rush past him. His heart pounded as the beast snarled, spinning around to strike again. "Kaelara!" though clearly injured, was back on her feet, her eyes blazing with fury. She rushed toward the creature, her blade gleaming as she plunged it deep into the side of its thick hide. The beast roared in pain, twisting its body in an attempt to shake her off. In that moment of distraction, Ethan found an opening. He swung the shard of metal with all his might, aiming for the creature's exposed underbelly. The weapon struck true, sinking deep into the beast's flesh. The creature let out one final, guttural roar before collapsing to the ground with a massive crash. Breathing heavily, Ethan stood over the fallen beast, his body trembling with adrenaline. Kaylara approached slowly, her eyes scanning the creature warily. She wiped the blood from her blade, then turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You fought well," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But this world is full of monsters. The Fori are not the only threat here." Ethan nodded, his chest heaving with exhaustion. "I'm starting to see that." Kaylara looked out into the storm, the wind whipping her hair around her face. "We need to keep moving. There's no time to rest." Ethan wasn't sure how much more he could endure, but he had no choice. The Fori were still out there. The storm wasn't done with them yet. And now, they had a new danger to contend with: breaking into the enemy base. The storm had not let up. If anything, it had grown more vicious, a blinding white fury that made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in front of them. The landscape had become an unforgiving labyrinth of snow, ice, and bone-shattering wind. But Kaylara moved with a sense of purpose, unwavering despite the harsh conditions, while Ethan did his best to keep up. He had learned to follow her lead. He had no other choice if he wanted to survive. The wind howled around them, whipping through the broken remnants of the world they had crash-landed on, but Kaylara barely seemed to notice. She moved like a shadow, her eyes scanning the horizon, her body attuned to every shift in the snowstorm. Ethan, on the other hand, was starting to feel the weight of the cold bearing down on him. His limbs were stiff, his face raw from the constant assault of ice particles. They were nearing their destination, the old Fori outpost. Kaylara had spoken little since their fight with the ice behemoth, but Ethan knew she was deeply focused. She had never hesitated, always knowing what to do next. It was as if she had been on this frozen world her entire life, which, in truth, she probably had. "How far?" Ethan asked through clenched teeth, struggling to keep his voice steady against the battering wind. "A few miles," she replied without looking back. Her voice was firm, but there was something else there, something darker. The tension in the air had grown heavier with every step they took, and Ethan could feel it in his gut. There was something wrong about this place. The Fori knew they were coming. The patrols had gotten closer. Soon, they would be out of time. They reached the base just as the storm began to shift. What had once been a mountain range now opened up into a valley of jagged ice, and there, hidden among the rock faces and snowdrifts, was the outpost. It was a crude structure built into the side of a frozen cliff. The walls were a mix of reinforced metal and alien stone, offering a bleak and utilitarian look, but it stood tall, its silhouette ominous against the swirling white storm. The Fori had established it long ago as a base of operations, an outpost to monitor and control the surrounding area. Kaylara paused at the edge of the outpost, her eyes scanning the area. Ethan followed her gaze, instinctively reaching for his sidearm, though he knew it wouldn't be enough if they were spotted. The air was thick with tension, and the oppressive silence hung like a weight between them. "Something feels off," Ethan muttered, his breath fogging in front of him. Kaylara's lips curled slightly, though her gaze remained sharp. "It is not just the storm," she said softly. "This base was abandoned, but someone has come back." Ethan didn't need to hear more. He could sense it, too, the quiet unease in the air. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and his heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. "We're not alone," he said, his voice low. Kaylara gave a short nod. "No, we're never truly alone in a place like this." They moved swiftly, hugging the shadows cast by the towering walls of the outpost, avoiding the main entrance. Kalara led them around the back, where a narrow gap in the rock allowed access into the structure. There were no guards here, or at least none that they could see. But Kalara was careful, her every move deliberate, as though expecting danger to spring out at them from any direction. They reached the gap, and Kalara crouched low, signaling for Ethan to follow. He did, his movements awkward in the deep snow, but he managed to keep his footing. Kalara moved like a ghost, sliding through the narrow gap without making a sound. Ethan followed as best as he could, trying to match her pace. Inside the outpost, the air was colder, but it was a different kind of cold, sterile, mechanical. The walls were lined with dim, flickering lights, casting long shadows over the empty corridors. The silence inside the structure was unnerving. It felt like a tomb, a place where time had stopped, and all that remained were echoes of the past. Kalara motioned for him to stay low as they moved through the hallways, her senses alert. They passed abandoned rooms and empty labs, their contents untouched by time, but eerily still. It was clear the outpost had been unused for a long while, but the faint hum of energy in the walls told them that someone had recently powered it back up. "They've been here recently," Kalara murmured. "The Fori are not the only ones on this world." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she replied, her voice tight. "But I don't like it. We need to find the control room. If there's anyone here, they'll have answers." They moved through the corridors, cautiously avoiding the few areas that had cameras or motion sensors. Kalara was precise, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. She led Ethan to a central hub, a large room that appeared to be the heart of the base. The walls were lined with strange alien technology, screens flickering with static and encrypted data. Ethan couldn't make sense of any of it, but Kalara moved swiftly to a console in the center of the room, her fingers dancing over the controls. The screens came to life as she accessed them, revealing a map of the base and surrounding areas. "Found it," she whispered. "There's a Fori patrol heading this way." Ethan's stomach dropped. "How long?" "Not long," Kalara said. "They'll be here soon." The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, a dull thud against the thick silence. Ethan's heart raced as Kalara looked up from the console, her eyes flashing with urgency. "We need to move," she said, grabbing his arm. "Now." But as they turned to leave, the door to the control room slid open with a sharp hiss, and Ethan froze. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim lights of the hallway. It was humanoid, but its features were obscured by the darkness. The air was thick with tension as Kalara's eyes narrowed. "I knew it," she muttered, her hand gripping her weapon tighter. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a tall, slender alien with strange markings along its arms. It wasn't a Fori, but it was something else, something far more dangerous. "You shouldn't have come here," the creature said, its voice low and smooth, almost hypnotic. Kalara's betrayal and the final stand. The figure in the doorway stood motionless, its presence hanging heavily in the air. Ethan's mind raced, trying to piece together who, or what, this new alien was. It didn't take long for him to realize that this wasn't one of the Fori. Its skin was darker, almost obsidian, and unlike the Fori's bulky, muscled appearance, this creature was taller, leaner, with fluid movements that made it look like a predator stalking its prey. Kalara's body was rigid beside him, her silver eyes locked on the figure, calculating, measuring, preparing. Her grip tightened around her blade, but there was something in her posture, something hesitant, that didn't make sense. She wasn't prepared to fight, at least, not yet. Ethan felt a shiver crawl down his spine. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice steady but laced with an edge of fear. The creature stepped further into the room, the low hum of the base's machinery creating an eerie backdrop. It tilted its head, almost as if amused. "You don't recognize me, human." Its voice was smooth, almost melodic, but there was a dangerous undertone that made Ethan's blood run cold. The words felt like a slap, but they were laced with an undeniable truth. Kalara's hesitation was no accident. Ethan's heart skipped. Something was very wrong. "Kalara," Ethan said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know this creature." Her eyes flickered, her gaze shifting from the alien to Ethan, and then back again. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her blade was still in her hand, but she hadn't moved to strike. You're one of them," Ethan muttered, realizing too late what was happening. "A traitor." Her eyes hardened, her jaw clenched, but it wasn't anger that twisted her features. It was guilt. There was pain there. Ethan couldn't process it at first, couldn't understand why she hadn't acted, why she hadn't fought this enemy as she had fought the others. The creature stepped closer, its predatory smile widening as it caught the exchange between the two. "Ah, yes. The human finally understands," it purred, each word like cold steel scraping across his skin. Kalara's gaze flickered to the creature, then back to Ethan, her eyes softening for a moment. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice rough, leaden with regret. "I didn't want to betray my people. But I was a tool, just like you. And now, I see the truth. I can't go back." Ethan's mind raced. Betrayal. The word echoed in his mind, louder than the sounds of the alien's footsteps, louder than his heartbeat. He had trusted Kalara. She had saved him. She had protected him from the Fori. And now she was working with whatever this creature was. His thoughts collided. How could she do this to him? To them both? But then, just as quickly, the cold realization hit him. She hadn't chosen the side of this alien. She had been forced into something she couldn't control. It wasn't betrayal for personal gain. No, it was survival. But that didn't make it any less painful. The truth stung deeper than the cold winds outside. The creature noticed the shift in Ethan's expression and let out a low laugh. "You think she is your ally, human. She's nothing but a shadow, a slave to her own people." Kalara flinched at the words, but she didn't deny them. She stood in silence, her face unreadable, but the weight of the moment was written across her features. "You won't win," Kalara finally said, her voice cold, but with an undeniable edge of defiance. "This is bigger than both of us. And you don't understand. None of you do." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What's bigger than this? Than all of this?" He gestured to the cold metal of the outpost, the growing threat outside, the war that had been ignited. "What's more important than stopping the Fori? Or are you too afraid to face the consequences of your actions?" Kalara's face tightened, the harsh lines of her jaw clenched in a way that made Ethan realize just how much she was fighting within herself. The fight wasn't just for survival now. It was for redemption, for honor, for a chance to make things right. The creature shifted behind her, moving with a fluid, almost serpentine grace. It was enjoying this, enjoying the confusion and the tension between them. "You can't change the past, Kalara. You should have stayed where you belonged. You know the Fori will never forgive you for this." She glanced over her shoulder at the creature, her voice thick with determination. "I don't need their forgiveness." Ethan, still struggling with the whirlwind of emotions, felt his stomach churn. He wanted to trust Kalara. He had to. There had to be a way to stop this, to make things right. But the lines were blurred. What had she really done? How much of this was beyond her control? The creature moved in closer, a cold smile playing at the edges of its lips. "So you are going to protect him, then? The human?" It laughed, the sound echoing against the walls. "You think you can save him? There's nothing you can do, Kalara. He's already marked." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Marked," he repeated, his voice sharp with fear and confusion. The creature nodded, its eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "You are of no consequence, human. Your planet is doomed, just like the rest of them. It's just a matter of time before we—" But the creature's words were cut off by a sudden violent motion. Without warning, Kalara turned on it, her blade flashing in the dim light as she launched herself at the creature with the fury of a storm. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he watched Kaelura fight the alien with all her might. She was faster than he could have imagined, her strikes precise, deadly. Yet the creature was equally powerful, its long limbs moving in a fluid, serpentine fashion. The clash between them was brutal, a dance of violence and rage that seemed to blur the space around them. But even as the battle raged, Kaelura's movements were slowing, her strikes losing some of their power. The creature was toying with her, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ethan could see it. Kaelura was running on empty. Desperation surged in him. He couldn't lose her, not after everything she had done for him. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed the nearest weapon, one of the Fouri's energy rifles, and aimed it at the creature. "Kaelura, get back," he shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. For a split second, Kaelura's eyes met his. In that moment, there was an understanding, an unspoken bond of trust. Then, without hesitation, she dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the alien's claw as Ethan fired. The blast hit the creature square in the chest, sending it stumbling back, its form twisting in agony. It screeched, a sound that rattled the very walls of the outpost, and for the first time, Ethan saw fear in its eyes. But before it could retaliate, Kaelura was on her feet, moving with lethal precision. She delivered a final strike, a blow that severed the creature's head clean off its shoulders. The room fell silent. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as he lowered the rifle. He looked at Kaelura, whose face was bathed in the flickering light of the dying creature. There was blood on her hands, and the weight of what had just happened was heavy in the air. But she had done it. She had saved them. Kaelura collapsed to her knees, exhaustion taking over her. "It's not over," she whispered, her voice shaking. "They will come. The Fouri won't stop." Ethan knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Then we fight. We keep fighting." But deep down, both of them knew this was only the beginning. The great escape and the new alliance. The cold wind howled through the narrow corridors of the outpost, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm raging within. The battle had left Ethan and Kaelura breathless, battered but alive. The alien creature they had just defeated lay in a crumpled heap, its severed head staring back at them with glassy, unseeing eyes. Kaelura's hands were stained with its blood, and the intensity of the fight still hung in the air. An electric tension neither of them could escape. The walls of the outpost felt closer now, as if they were shrinking with every passing moment. Ethan sat against the cold metal of the control room, trying to catch his breath. His hands still trembled, and he felt a sickening mixture of exhaustion and dread creeping into his bones. He hadn't had time to think, to process what had happened, the sheer violence of the battle, the betrayal he had just witnessed, the realization that Kaelura had once been one of them. But now, the silence was deafening. Kaelura moved across the room, her every step calculated, deliberate. She wiped the blood from her blade, her face still set in that grim expression of someone who had seen too much and been forced to choose too many times. Ethan watched her, his mind trying to make sense of everything. What did her betrayal mean? Did it change what they had built together? Or was this just another step in a larger war that neither of them could fully comprehend? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The harsh sound of their breathing was the only thing that filled the room. Finally, Kaelura broke the silence, her voice soft, but laced with a weight of meaning. "They'll send more. The Fouri will come for us. We're not safe here." Ethan stood up slowly, his body protesting with each movement, but he had no time to rest. They couldn't afford it. "Then we leave," he said firmly, his words cutting through the tension. "We can't stay here. We need to get back to the ship. Find a way to signal for help." Kaelura turned toward him, her eyes searching his face. "You don't understand. They will track us. There's no escape on this world. They know where we are now. And even if we make it to your ship, we'll never outrun the Fouri fleet. We need a way off this planet, a way to escape them for good." Ethan's heart sank at her words. His mind began to race. They were trapped. The outpost was no longer a safe haven. It was a ticking time bomb, and the Fori were already on their way to wipe them out. But what was Kalara saying? Did she know something? Something that could save them? "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, stepping toward her. "How do we escape?" Kalara paused for a moment, her expression unreadable. She glanced at the map still flashing on the control screen, her fingers lightly brushing over the holographic display. "There's a network, hidden deep under this planet's surface. A transit system, used for emergencies, for situations like this. The Fori don't know about it. At least not yet. But I do." Ethan's eyes widened. A transit system? Under the planet? That sounded impossible, but if there was even a chance, where does it go? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked toward the back of the room, pulling open a hidden compartment in the floor. Inside, there were old, worn-out maps of the planet's surface and underground tunnels, some parts of the system marked with a strange symbol. She pulled one of the maps out and spread it across the table, her fingers tracing the lines as she spoke. "This is where it starts," Kalara said, pointing to a spot deep within the planet's ice-covered core. "It leads to a facility, a neutral zone. If we can get there, we can get off this world. We can make it to the outer rim. There's a shipyard there, one that can help us escape." Ethan frowned, his mind still spinning with the possibilities. "And how do we get there?" Kalara's eyes met his, the weight of her past decision hanging between them. "We'll have to cross the Fori-controlled regions. It won't be easy. We'll have to move fast and stay hidden. If we're caught." "I get it," Ethan finished for her. "We die." Her gaze softened slightly. "Yes, but if we're smart, we can make it. I've done worse before." The finality of her words hit Ethan hard. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about running from the Fori. They were about to do something much bigger, something that might change everything for them both. The way Kalara looked at him now, with a flicker of hope in her eyes despite the grim situation, made Ethan realize something he hadn't fully understood before. Kalara wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting for a future. The silence between them stretched for a moment before Ethan nodded. "All right, we'll do it. We have no other choice." Kalara gave him a small, determined smile. "Good. Let's move." They gathered their gear, taking what little they could carry from the base's stores. The weapons were useful, but their best bet was to avoid a fight at all costs. Kalara led the way as they exited the control room, moving through the base's darkened corridors. Outside, the storm still raged, but now there was a new urgency in their steps. They had no time to waste. The Fori would be closing in, and the longer they stayed, the more likely they were to be discovered. As they reached the edge of the outpost, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The cold was unbearable, but they had no choice. They had to go now. Kalara led them into the storm, the wind howling as they made their way toward the entrance to the underground network. Ethan could barely see through the swirling snow, but Kalara's figure was a steady beacon, her movements sure and swift. They reached the entrance, a hidden hatch beneath a pile of snow. It was well concealed, but Kalara had found it before. She'd been here before, and now she was taking him with her. They descended into the depths of the planet, into the ice tunnels that stretched far beneath the surface. The chill in the air was almost unbearable, but the tunnel was stable, providing a brief respite from the storm. As they ventured deeper, Ethan realized that their journey wasn't just about surviving this world. It was about surviving each other. The alliance they had forged was fragile, but it was their only hope, and perhaps it was a chance for redemption, for Kalara and for him. As they descended into the darkness, Ethan took one last look at the surface above them. The snowstorm continued to rage, but they were no longer a part of it. Now they were heading toward something unknown, toward a future that only they could create.